As we celebrate this Yom Haatzmaut, 72 years after the founding of the state, there's a question we could ask ourselves, and that is, how connected are we? How much do we share in common with those who came before us? I mean, that was in Israel. That was when people were literally draining the swamps. They were fighting battles with First World War rifles. We live across the sea. We live at an age later, generations later. We live a completely different life, a life of luxury, a life not with struggles, not with guns, not in the same way that those people were experiencing, the founders of the state of Israel. How do we relate to it? I would like to share a story, a very powerful story, which I recently came across. It's about a very special individual. His name was Rav Kook, Rav Avram Yitzchak Cohen Kook. He became ultimately the chief rabbi first in Yafo, in one of the port towns in Israel, and later on the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim, forming the chief rabbinate in Israel. The chief rabbinate we have in Israel is as a function of the fact that he set up the chief rabbinate. He was a very, very holy individual. And once, one of the people who was with him was a man by the name of Yigal Gal Ezer. Later became the vice comptroller in Israel, and he tells the following story, a very strange story which occurred. And I think it's a very powerful story in understanding how the formation of Israel, how becoming Israel was so important then and now. One morning, Rav Kook was in his office in Yerushalayim, and he hears a knock on the door. He ushers in individual, and standing at the door is a very, very thin, very slight individual with slight gray in his hair, and he looks clearly like a Yemenite, a Temani Israeli, a man who had come from the area in Yemen, which is down south, and made aliyah to Israel. He had these curly payot, and he's obviously very scared coming to visit the chief rabbi. This is a very big deal. So the Rav Kook welcomes him, and he says, no, so Reb Yid, young man, what's bothering you? So the man stammered. He's very nervous to speak in front of Rav Kook, and he said, I have to tell you, I have a very difficult question to ask. Rav Kook says, so tell me, what's the problem? So the man says, look, I made aliyah to the land of Israel. I came from a land which is very far from here, and I've tried to work. And the only work I could find was being a landscaper. I would take rocks, I would move the rocks, I would dig in the dirt, I would drain the swamps, I would make the land fit for living. But you know what? I was working for somebody else, was working for somebody else, was working for somebody else. And I'd work back-breaking work for 10, 12, 14 hours a day, and I still wouldn't earn enough money to be able to support my family. My question is, Harav, the rabbi, am I allowed to go to America to be able to support my family, to be able to find other opportunities, to be able to put bread on the table? So Rav Kook looked at the man for a moment, and in deep thought he closed his eyes, and he didn't respond. After a minute or two, he opens his eyes and he says to this young man, he says, stands up, and he says, no, shave, you come sit on my seat. So the man said, no, I can't sit on the rabbi's seat. So he says, no, come, sit. So the man has no alternative. The Taimani fellow comes round the desk of the rabbi and he sits down in the rabbi's seat. Upon which, and this is eyewitness testimony, this was seen firsthand by another person, Yigal Gal Ezer, who describes this story as is written in the biography of Rav Kook, which is called An Angel Among Men, written by Rav Simcha Raz. This is what happens. As soon as he sits down, he falls asleep. He goes into a trance of sorts. He puts his head down on the desk and he falls asleep, this man. A few minutes later, he wakes up, and Rav Kook says, what happened? The man said, I went into a dream and I had this terrifying dream. Rav Kook said, so tell me what happened in the dream? The man said, I was coming up to Shemaim, I was coming up to the court of Hashem, and I saw it was the end of my life, and they were measuring. They had this huge set of scales, and they were measuring. And there was a whole bunch of malachim, of angels, who were putting onto the scales all kinds of averos, all the bad things I did in my life. And it was going lower and lower and lower, and that side of the scale was winning. And then, what happened was, I was getting very despondent. I was getting very worried. And then another set of malachim started coming, and they had bags. And they started throwing the bags onto the other side of the scale. And slowly it started measuring down. It was equalizing the balance. And I said, what's in those bags? And the Malachim said, this is all the sand, all the dust, all the rocks you dug in the land of Israel. Every digging, every cultivating, every making better the land of Israel was a mitzvah. All of that is your merit. And more and more and more the scales tilted. The man said, and then I woke up. And Rav Kook smiled and he put his hand on his shoulder and he said, I think you have your answer. And I think we also have an answer. Sometimes we struggle. Sometimes it's difficult. We feel like all day long we're doing something which isn't so easy. Does it make sense? Does it add up? We feel like we're moving sand around. But you know what? Sometimes when you realize, if we know that we're doing mitzvahs, if we know we're doing the right thing, even though it doesn't look like it adds up, sometimes those mitzvahs, they will be what we carry with us. When it comes to the land of Israel and appreciating it, we need to appreciate the amount of effort, the amount of work, the amount of suffering, the amount of sacrifice that was given to make Israel so special for us today. The amount of hours, lives sacrificed in order for us to be safe today, in order for us to get on a plane, God willing as we should be able to soon, and fly to the land of Israel, and be able to walk in the land of Israel, and to be able to kiss the ground in the land of Israel, and to appreciate every mitzvah which comes with every grain of sand in the land of Israel. May we be able to appreciate that. May we not have to suffer to get to appreciate that. May we enjoy it, and hopefully we can all soon go to Israel and appreciate just how special it is. Have a meaningful Yom Haatzmaut.